Welcome to The State of Us.
Beyond mainstream cable news and party lines, with a millennial and a boomer, The State of Us pushes past the noise and uncovers all the issues that matter.
Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
A number of federal departments were hacked in the SolarWinds breach caused by Russia, and that includes now the federal judiciary's filing system, electronic filing system. Ultra-sensitive court records have likely been compromised as a result of the Russia hack. Today, the fundamental question, though, that we're addressing is, should we declare war on Russia? Now, that may seem extreme, but give us a chance to discuss it today. We're going to look at both the Russia hack, the most recent one of our federal government, right? So not so much necessarily a partisan thing as it is just the federal government being attacked. Then we're also going to discuss how Russia stands to benefit from climate change. And ultimately, in the third segment, we will answer the question, is Russia the problem or is Russia's leader the problem? We've got a lot to talk about, but of course, we could not begin a conversation on Russia and Putin without
TrueChat senior historian and an educator of more than 30 years. Here is your friendly redneck liberal, Lance Jackson.
I've enjoyed studying Russian history throughout my entire life, and the Russian people are something of a wonder with all the things that they've accomplished. But since they became a communist country, more than 100 years ago, their leadership has been something to wonder and behold, not in a good way. Today's word of the day, rhynchocephalian. 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 It means designating or of a nearly extinct order of lizard-like reptiles. Okay, that's kind of my description of Vladimir Putin. He is a lizard-like reptile. Rhynchocephalian. Yes.
Rhynchocephalian. All right. This is, I think, the second word now in Lance's word of the day history that, I have not heard before.
Trying to educate people the best I can.
Lance, let's start with the and to point out to people, folks, if you don't know,
I gave away how I feel about whether it's the Russian people or the leader that we should be upset with.
Okay,
but anyway, well, sorry if I let my side out. You can stay tuned and listen to see where Justin falls on that.
I was going to say, this is coming from the man everybody should know. He's the boomer and I'm the millennial. So he will tell you he was alive for the Cold War and Chernobyl and all of that kind of stuff. So he's got that lived experience. Fall of the Soviet Union.
I watched it on TV when Rocky fought in Russia. Originally, I don't have to watch the movie. I was there when he fought for real. Yeah, I watched that.
Okay. Watched it live.
Yep,
did you?
when Gorbachev stands up. I remember that scene well when I was watching it on ABC's Wide World of Sports. Yeah,
gotcha. So the hack that we're looking at, this I think is one of those things, as we've talked about with other hacks. It can be difficult to get your hands around. How severe is it? And the real thing that I think, Lance, is even perhaps more concerning is President Biden admits, quote, the question of the damage done remains to be determined. So we don't even know. I mean, we know that it's serious because we know the language that's being used to describe it. And keep in mind, folks, just for some recollection here, this occurred during the Trump administration, right? So it was a hack in 2020. And this is what the Biden administration is talking about in terms of how they are planning, what they're planning to respond to. And the first thing is to get their arms around just what happened. And that's kind of the thing that sticks out to me, Lance, is not just the severity of the attack, but really we don't even know how severe it was yet.
Well, the technological wizard that I am, that all our listeners know that I am, what really concerns me is exactly what President Biden said, and that is the fact this is very damaging, or could be very damaging, in the same realm of biological warfare, in that how many things do we all have that are connected to the internet, to technology. I mean, it's just amazing. We don't even know, right? I mean, most of us don't even understand in our daily lives all the different things that we just take for granted that are connected by computers or run by computers for us. You know, your thermostat, your heat, the gas pumps, the scanning machines, at your local grocery store. All of those things, you know, could be hacked by anybody. And then when I'm reading the articles, for today's show, you know, they're talking about the back way or the back door entries that this could get. So it's like, well, they're in stuff, you know, they hacked into things that really aren't that important. Yeah, but what will it allow them to hack in by getting into that point? You know, and maybe even the Russian government who did this doesn't even know. It's kind of an exploratory surgery. Well, let's just put all these bugs in here and let's see where we can get. Well, that's why we don't know how much damage has been done, because a lot of it's going to continue to become apparent as we discover more and more ways that they violated our system. And if being violated doesn't make you upset, I'm not even going to get into yet, I'll hold my tongue, about the history of the communist governments in Russia and the way they have worked historically.
A couple points of clarification about the hack. One is some people might be wondering, why is it called solar winds? Well, ultimately what happened is the process of corrupting a software update that was provided by the network management company SolarWinds that enabled hackers to infiltrate scores of computer systems without detection. Austin-based SolarWinds has customers across the federal government and major U.S. businesses, giving the hackers a range of lucrative espionage targets. The hack so far is widely viewed as a cyber espionage campaign rather than one intended to damage or corrupt computer systems. Okay, so what does that mean? The point of this was Russia discovering if they can do it, right? It's espionage, not trying to cause damage. So it wasn't about get the information. It wasn't about steal something specific. It wasn't about cause us pain or damage. It was about espionage. It was about seeing how long and could they go undetected, right? Because that's the thing that was concerning about this, is we're just now learning about it. But this actually happened a while ago. And the other important note, too, is that so far, even under the Trump administration, Chris Curbs, who was the top cybersecurity official for the Department of Homeland Security, pointed out that based on everything that we can see, there's no indications that the election was part of what was compromised as a result of this hack. Any notion of tying this to, you know, President Biden being elected incorrectly or, you know, because of Russia's involvement or something, which would kind of be ironic since, you know, the previous hack and help and possibly doing things on social media that helped President Trump, you know, but that's kind of the point though today though, Lance, I think is right. The Russians are going to do, their goal is not, and I talked about this before when we talked about the Trump thing that people needed to understand. It's not that they want Trump or that they don't want Biden or that they want Biden and not Trump. It's not that. What they want is to do whatever is going to cause our nation the most problems. That's what they want, right? So set aside the nonsense about, you know, they like Trump. They don't like Trump. They don't like, and when I say they, let's also be clear, I'm talking about the Russian government here, just to be succinct as we're going to talk about moving on. It has nothing to do with people that they like. They don't like us, okay? They don't like somebody else having more power than them. And I don't know a lot of people that do, just for the record. I mean, I'm not sure that there's a lot of people that say, oh yeah, I'm just happy when other people have a lot of power over me. But they want to do whatever is going to cause us problems. So if they can sow division by helping Trump get into office, they want to do it. If they could sow division by helping somebody else get into office, that's what they want. They want us to crumble from within, if possible.
Well, it is not the Russian people. It is the Russian government. And if you say the Russian government, it is a dictatorship. So it is Putin. So, I mean, just cut to the chase. All right. It's Putin and his cronies, the people who are working for him. And that's what they do. And they can't take us on literally because you go back to the Cold War. We crushed them militarily to the point we ruined their economy. They could not keep up with us economically to produce enough weapons to take us on face to face. So now they're resorting to this to cause destruction of our country because they want to be a world power. So they couldn't get us one way. Now they're going to try to get us another way, as long as Putin and the people who feel the way he does, which is not the majority of the Russian people, as long as they're in power, this is what you can expect. This is their ultimate goal. If you study the history of the communist Russian government, this is its MO. It's going to do whatever it can to become the dominant world power and will take down anybody, any way, anyhow they can that stands in their way. And the only thing they respond to is force, is standing up to them. And I'm not necessarily saying military force. I'm just saying force. It can be economic sanctions. It can be all kinds of things. I'm not advocating before you start blowing up our email to say, well, you guys saying we should go into nuclear. No. Stay tuned to the rest of the segments. But I'm just saying they only stop or slow down when you stand up to them. There is no talking to them and thinking they're going to shake their hand yes while they're stabbing the knife in your back. That's what they've done historically.
I think the other thing for people to keep in mind here as we go into the next segment is, why should you care about hacks like this? Well, they prove that we are vulnerable and that Russia has the capacity to find these vulnerabilities. And you may say, well, I don't really care if the federal judiciary system files were hacked, right? I'm not in those ultra secure files, so it doesn't matter to me. The point is that attacks like this prove that it could be possible for Russia to infiltrate systems like our power grid. So, if you like to charge your iPhone, then you might not want Russia to take over the power grid because
or our banking system.
Right. Yeah. Do you like your money? Do you like being able to buy your iPhone? Because at the end of the day, it comes down to things like this are examples of the potential that Russia could dismantle our technological systems that run our society. They could not just take your bank down. They could erase your money, right? And they could permanently cut off your power. On and on and on, right? These are the types of things we're talking about, and that's why this is so important. We've got more to talk about, though, because Russia could stand to benefit the most from an increase in climate change. How is that possible? Keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
There's no question that the SolarWinds hack by the Russian government was serious. It's more of a question of how serious. And now we get to discuss why Russia probably stands to benefit from climate change, which would seem like an odd thing because usually when we talk about climate change, we talk about how it's bad, not only for the planet, but for the people, and how hundreds of millions, possibly billions of individuals will have to, notice I said have to, not, I'm going to be stubborn and stay in my home when a hurricane's coming. No, your home will be gone because it will be under 50 feet of water. Gone, right? So you won't be staying, you will have to move, right? So we talk about the potentially billions that will have to relocate as a result of climate change. But Russia's standing kind of over here on the side saying, yeah, this might be a good thing for us. And this is another part of today's discussion about should we declare war on Russia. Before we do that, though, because this is part of understanding the importance of how Russia stands to benefit from climate change, a pop quiz question first for our producer, and then we will check with Lance. What continent is Russia part of? And this is always fun because a lot of people don't even know the continents. So not that I'm saying Devin doesn't, but
I
a lot of
don't.
people, okay, well, but a lot of people don't, couldn't name them all correctly. So I will narrow it down for you and tell you that, your options are Europe or Asia.
Wouldn't it be Asia?
All right. Devin's guess is Asia. Lance?
It's both.
Yes. Trick question.
It was a trick question.
It is at least the, I believe, proper terminology is a transcontinental country. So they span parts of Northern Asia and Eastern Europe.
The region is called Eurasia, and it's separated by typically the Ural Mountains, and the majority of the Russian population lives in Europe. And because most of the land controlled by Russia in Asia is tundra, very good for mining and things like that. But most of the population and the livable, arable regions of the Russian government is in the continent of Europe.
And that is part of the point of this segment, is to understand just how large Russia is, because this plays an important role. As Lance pointed out, much of Russia is not uninhabited, but so sparsely inhabited that you would feel like it was uninhabited because there's so few people in much of the land area of Russia. In fact, Russia sits at 6.6 million square miles of land. And you might say, well, how big is that? Because I've looked at world maps and it doesn't look like it's that much bigger than the United States. Well, the United States is 3.8 million square miles. So if we doubled the United States, we would just barely be larger than Russia. So it's huge is kind of, I guess, what we're saying. There is an immense amount of land, and they have about half the population that we have. They have about 144 million people versus our 320 million. So a little under half. And, the point there is they've got plenty, like we in the United States have quote unquote plenty of land. And you talk about, how much farmland you want to give up and all that. But farmland is exactly why Russia stands to benefit. We've referenced, by the way, so far, Wall Street Journal articles. There's a great New York Times piece, New York Times Magazine piece, all linked at thestateofus.org on why Russia stands to benefit from climate change. Very lengthy, but it boils down to this, Lance. As temperatures rise, more of Russia becomes potential farmland. And not just any farmland, but incredibly fertile, incredibly productive farmland, right? And that's part of where Russia stands to benefit, because I think it's safe to say, and you tell me if you disagree, Lance, but one of the reasons the United States, not just our military prowess, but one of the reasons that we've been able to have such an important position in the world is that we're an important part of the food supply system in the world. And if you can be an important part of the food network for the world, you have the ability to exercise more influence, since, people need to eat. And that's where I think that's the interesting thing here, is that Russia stands to gain, potentially millions and millions of acres of farmland as a result of climate change. And so, when you hear hesitation from Russia about embracing things to slow climate change, I think it's safe to say that a part of that hesitation is they're looking at it and saying it's going to force millions of people, possibly billions, to have to move. Our country is going to become potentially more inhabitable as a result of climate change. We're going to gain farmland, so we're going to have room for people to move in. We're going to have food to feed people. We're going to have food probably to export to the rest of the world. It looks like a pretty sweet deal for Russia. By those metrics. Granted, there's other bad things that happen to all of us. But, if you're Russia, Lance, right, those things make it look like it wouldn't be the worst thing if it warms up here a little bit.
And it's going to do the same thing for Canada. It's just that Russia is our enemy, so to speak. I would say it is.
And larger by almost twice.
Right. But it has that kind of land. The land that is no good now because it's too cold will become arable with global warming, and then therefore it will allow them to grow more crops. And, Russia has always been an agrarian country like the United States. It also has, would also make it a little bit easier to mine some of the places in Russia that have lots of raw materials in the ground. If the weather would warm up, it would make it easier to do the work and to extract the minerals from the ground. There are a lot of different ways that the land that is not good for a whole lot in Russia right now to become very valuable. And then that would make them a much bigger player on the world stage.
That's, I think, part of getting a grasp around, yes, climate change is bad for the world collectively. There are nations, Russia is one of them, and as Lance pointed out, notably because they are viewed as an adversary, or adversary, if you want to stick with the the Russian pronunciation. The point is that that Russia is one of the nations that we have to be paying attention to, because if we understand, Lance, the angle they're coming from, right? The reality is that even if we do, and this is the thing that I think is important for people to understand, Russia benefits from slowing climate change because we all benefit from it long term. The damage that has already been done that we are not yet going to feel for another 20 or 50 years will benefit Russia. So the understanding there, right, is that these nations that benefit from climate change only benefit to the extent of the damage that's already occurred. If the damage gets a lot worse than it is, none of the benefits are going to outweigh the consequences for any of us. So I guess I just want to add that note because I think it's important that people understand that.
This whole thing doesn't have anything to do with whether you liked the presidency of Donald Trump or didn't like the presidency for all kinds of moral, social reasons. But this was the big disconcerting point to me, on top of however you feel about all that other stuff, was that he never stood up to Russia and to Putin. That's dangerous. It's so dangerous. And what do we see? We see this hack. We see this espionage point where the Russians are proving that they can get into us. If that doesn't say it, I mean, take out all of the social and other things, which we can debate on another day. And I, if you don't know how I feel, we can, get a hold of me and we'll talk and I'll tell you how I feel. But to just blatantly watch him let Putin do whatever he wanted to do and never call him on the carpet just ran up a big, huge flag for me, because it's like, you can't trust these people as far as if they're being led by Vladimir Putin. You get some of the opposition leaders in charge of Russia, we can have a relationship. Mikhail Gorbachev, Boris Yeltsin. There were some Russian leaders post-Cold War that we could deal with, but not Putin. You can't deal with him the way you would another democratically elected leader. You have to play hardball with him. You can't ignore him. He'll take advantage of it every time. And this is the fallout from that. This is the example that proves that.
So we still have to talk about, Lance, and still go over the ultimate question of should we declare war on Russia? And that boils down to something that you've already hinted at. Is it the leader or is it Russia? And while the answer may seem simple, it is a little more complicated than that. And that's part of why we want to take time to discuss it. How should the United States proceed with Russia in the coming years? To find out, keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
We know that a lot of our most dedicated listeners are the ones that make it to the third segment of the show. You're also the ones that tend to send us the most comments, which we greatly appreciate. And one of the reasons that we're glad that you stick around is because often with shows like this, one, we take a hit, Lance, right, for doing a show that's about Russia anyway, because frankly, it's hard to get people to care about countries other than what's going on in the U.S. Even some topics in the U.S. are hard to get people to care about, let alone you're talking about Russia benefiting from climate change, and it's like, who the hell cares? But hopefully you've started to get an idea here of why we have to care about not only Russia benefiting from climate change, but paying attention to things like cyber attacks, which traditionally are harder to get our minds around than, Russia putting troops in a country that we don't like. Right.
Well, they're doing that too, and got away with it. I mean, we didn't talk about it. We did for years, and we got away during the Trump administration talking about what was going on in Syria and the Middle East. But that's a whole nother issue that needs to be addressed by the American people and the American government. But during a pandemic and other things that were going on, it took a back seat. But, the poor Syrian refugees and what we allowed the Russian government to do under Putin there is a shame.
Well, and also, I mean, in fairness, for much of Putin's reign, he has focused on bringing former Soviet-controlled areas back into Russia's control, including in the Obama administration, Crimea and other territories that have been that they have viewed as of interest, regardless of whether those areas want to be part of Russia or not. It's kind of, if Russia wants them, Russia intends to take them, especially if we stand by and let them do it. So we want your feedback, though, on today's episode. We always want it. You can email podcast@thestateofus.org, podcast@thestateofus.org. Let us know, like what generation you belong to and how you view Russia, because I think we're interested in that, and the question here of, is it Russia or is its leader? First, the little dab of history, right, Lance, that the government of the Russian Federation was established in June of 1990. So it's not very old, about 30 years old. And it was revised to its current form in December of 1993. And officially, it is a federation. And the government, the members of the government are the prime minister, the deputy prime minister, and the federal ministers. It has its legal basis in the Constitution of the Russian Federation and the federal constitution law of the government of the Russian Federation. So the point is, right, the president of Russia was the head of the executive branch and headed the Council of Ministers of Russia. But according to the new constitution in 1993 and subsequent revisions, the president is not part of the government of Russia, which exercises executive power, but the president does appoint the prime minister. So essentially, what you've got is you've got the way it's written and the way that it works. And the way that it works is it's been changed to favor basically allowing the same, as Lance pointed out, dictator to remain in power. So yes, officially, their form of government is actually a form of a Republican government, right? A representative style government. But in reality, many of the things that were set as protections, like term limits, for example, have been subsequently removed or revised to allow Putin to stay in power.
I mean, you state the facts. Yes, that's exactly what happened. And to the point that he served his terms as leader under the new government and then had the constitution changed so he could come back into power because he didn't like the direction the country was going.
By the way, just as a disclosure item to people, I had the opportunity to travel to Russia when I was 7 years old, and it is one of the few memories from my early childhood that is so vivid. There's not much about that trip that I don't remember, for good and bad reasons. Nothing, by the way, nothing terrible happened. It was by all means as good of a trip to Russia, I think, as you could hope one to be, but an incredibly educational experience, even at 7 years old, and something that I definitely carry with me today, because never have I been to a place that was so different than us, and yet similar in many ways. Everybody that's alive in Russia today, right, has never really lived with democracy for more than about 10 years at any given point. Some of them have never lived with real democracy. And I think that's that whole, when we talk about, people can't know what they don't know. It's easy to blame the Russian people and say you should rise up against your leader. But you have to keep in mind that their media and their internet is controlled by the state. And when they experienced democracy, which Lance has pointed out before, it was not a particularly pleasant experience. Because the transition to democracy is not easy, and the transition to capitalism is one where lots of suffering ensues. And they didn't like that, as nobody would. I mean, nobody would enjoy the suffering, right? So, part of this is to understand that it's not been an easy road for the Russian people really ever. At least not in modern history. They've had a rough go of it. And that's good leaders, bad leaders, leaders all the same. It's been a tough existence for them for a lot of reasons that don't have anything to do with their leadership, and just has to do with the situations that they've been thrust into.
Well, that's very true. But we're seeing them, in at least some of them, starting to stand up against what's going on. We've seen pictures. If you Google it, whatever you need to do, use whatever web search, we talk about that all the time here, that you want to use, but find the pictures of what's going on. There is protest, and there were, the police, the military was called out, and they were being beaten up and things like that, over the poisoning of one of the leaders who's standing up to Putin, and who, when he went back into Russia just recently, was arrested and thrown in jail. So there are people trying to, so don't sell them short. There is a resistance movement that is growing, that is large. But when you're dealing with what I will again call a dictator, that it makes it even harder to stand up to it when it's not in your DNA, to talk about democracy and capitalism. And as we know, those of us who believe in the United States as a democracy and as our capitalist society, it's not all good. We have problems. We have issues we need to fix. You have poor people. You have homeless people. You have people that are going hungry, and we don't like that. Some of us don't like that. That doesn't mean we want to get rid of the system, but we want to fix it so we can learn to take better care of those people. But if you've grown up in a communist country like Russia was, well, if you were poor, your neighbors were poor too. So you didn't know. That's like when I grew up, I didn't know I was poor. We were, but I didn't know because I had the same thing that everybody else did. So sometimes you don't realize that, but it is a
particularly pleasant experience, because the transition to democracy is not easy, and the transition to capitalism is one where lots of suffering ensues. And they didn't like that, as nobody would. Nobody would enjoy the suffering, right? So, part of this is to understand that it's not been an easy road for the Russian people really ever. At least not in modern history. They've had a rough go of it. And that's good leaders, bad leaders, leaders all the same. It's been a tough existence for them for a lot of reasons that don't have anything to do with their leadership, and just has to do with the situations that they've been thrust into.
Well, that's very true. But we're seeing them, in at least some of them, starting to stand up against what's going on. We've seen pictures. If you Google it, whatever you need to do, use whatever web search, we talk about that all the time here, that you want to use, but find the pictures of what's going on. There is protest, and there were, the police, the military was called out, and they were being beaten up and things like that, over the poisoning of one of the leaders who's standing up to Putin, and who, when he went back into Russia just recently, was arrested and thrown in jail. So there are people trying to, so don't sell them short. There is a resistance movement that is growing, that is large. But when you're dealing with what I will again call a dictator, that it makes it even harder to stand up to it when it's not in your DNA, to talk about democracy and capitalism. And as we know, those of us who believe in the United States as a democracy and as our capitalist society, it's not all good. we have problems. We have issues we need to fix. You have poor people. You have homeless people. You have people that are going hungry, and we don't like that. Some of us don't like that. That doesn't mean we want to get rid of the system, but we want to fix it so we can learn to take better care of those people. But if you've grown up in a communist country like Russia was, well, if you were poor, your neighbors were poor too. So you didn't know. I mean, that's like when I grew up, I didn't know I was poor. We were, but I didn't know because I had the same thing that everybody else did. So sometimes you don't realize that, but it is tough to make that change. There are hardships to go through. And sometimes when you start to do that, you look back and say, well, at least I knew that I was going to get a meal of gruel and watered down tea and some beet soup. Well, that's better than not having any meal at all. And that's what the Russian people have gone through, which is why I don't blame them. They needed more support when they made that transition in 1993. And they didn't get it. And so they went back to the comfort level that they knew and understood. And then that's where we are now. And now there are people trying to fight back, and we need to continue to support that, because we should not be supporting, as the United States, we should not be supporting dictators around the world, even if they're, quote, our dictator. And in this case, Putin's not our dictator.
So the ultimate question, Lance, of do we declare war on Russia? I think the answer is we should declare war on Putin. And I don't think it should be a secret. I mean, as we've done the show over the years, I think I was right with a lot of what you said at the beginning before we started recording today, that he's got to go, not because it's in the United States' best interest, but because it's in the best interest of the people of Russia and the people of the world. This is a man that I don't think is interested in any sort of real peace or negotiation or anything really that doesn't directly benefit restoring the Soviet Union. And that to me is, we should do what we can to help the resistance, not because they can't do it on their own, but because we as a nation should do more of what we used to do and encourage those types of things, and not sit idly by and say, well, there's repercussions to it. And yeah, we should think about the repercussions, but I think it's a question in this case of it's just the right thing to do. Part of the reason, Lance, at least in what I've studied, part of the reason that the democratic movement in Russia failed is because we were too idle in the process, and we did not help as much as we should have. And not to make Russia American, just to let them be and have more say over their own destiny.
They need support to work through the hardships and come to whatever they want to live under. And we stop that from happening by our idleness and then allowing Putin to take over and then Putin to continue to run things. And when you say declare war, I'm not necessarily talking about a military arms type of deal. I think we need to isolate Russia from the world stage, which will hurt the Russian people, but it will cause them then maybe to rise up against Putin and get him out of there. And that's what has to be done. And the way to do that is to isolate Putin and the Russian government from the world stage, because then that will cause the people of Russia to do what they need to do. And that is whether through, elections or whatever, is to take Putin out of the leadership, which is there are opposition groups. They just don't stand a chance in the way the system is set up. So they need to